Hey everybody, we're back live now. Can we ask you all to come back? Facilitators, can we close at the table? Okay, if our Roman micers can start, and we're going to go to tables 2, 8 and 14 in the first instance. So table 2, please, firstly, and I'll take the 3 questions together and we'll try to get through as many as we possibly can. Can I just say as we kick off, our panellists are joined by Annette Honan, who will support questions around the education centre, the education sector as well. So, table 2, please. If you're ready. If you're not, we can go to someone else. Okay. Table 2.
In regards to engagement with education or prevention, does that really reach the people who need it, the people that are marginalised in society? Do they actually engage with the prevention? I need to ask maybe Karen or Connor.
Thank you very much. Very clear question and well directed. Table 8, please.
What studies brought you to the conclusion that the magic mushrooms are a party drug and they are used for fun and they are addictive, when it's a well-known fact that they are actually treating addiction and they are also treating depression?
Thank you. Again, very clear. Anybody in particular you want to direct that question to? Table 8? It's okay, I'll handle it. Table 14, please.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. Could we just ask Dr. Michael, please, does he think that random drug testing in colleges would be a deterrent for students?
Thank you very much. Again, very clear questions. Can I just go to the first question, please, the panel, education and prevention, particularly for Karen. Are we sure that it's reaching marginalised people and engaging with marginalised communities and individuals and people? Karen?
Yeah, well, look, universal prevention is aimed at everybody, and with that, it goes into a number of different settings. It goes into, like, we have a project that we are funding that is in a school that is in a DESH area and a healthy community area, which is a deprived area as well. So, we are considering that in the development of these programs, and we are specifically kind of trying to bring things along to that area. Richie, do you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I'd echo what Karen says. Like, I suppose we do have some targeted interventions, and we'd see that in different levels of social policy, and I suppose people living in deprived areas do need enhanced interventions, but the best value stuff is universal prevention. Like, again, Iceland would be the model for having success in reducing adolescent drug use, and they don't pick and choose who gets the intervention. So the leisure vouchers, no matter whether you're rich or poor, you get it, and that avoids stigma and it kind of improves socialisation. So we kind of look at universal prevention first, but we do also have targeted interventions that reach marginalised communities.
Yeah, Celeste, or indeed your colleague, Annette, do you want to make any comment on that?
I'd just like to mention on the curriculum side, the prevention piece and the education piece is actually mandatory for that all children have access to SPHE. And Celeste had mentioned this, social personal health education. Is this unique space in our curriculum where every child in Ireland in primary and in junior cycle has access to SPHE. It's one of the core parts of the curriculum, and within that, education around substance misuse and all aspects of making healthy choices and the kinds of skills that are important to do that are a really core part of that curriculum. So therefore, in that sense, all young people have access to education and prevention in this area. Up to 16, that is, because when we get to senior cycle then, Celeste also mentioned that from then on, social personal health education is actually not mandatory, and schools may or may not choose to timetable SPHE within their curriculum. So the new and updated curriculum that's out for consultation is actually asking that question of, should it now be mandatory? And I wouldn't like to be putting words in your mouth, but if you were to propose that, it could be quite helpful at this point in time, because otherwise, students really come to a cliff edge, and their education in this space then, it's down to where they are in a particular school, whether or not this area is actually attended to them beyond 16. So that's just something I'd like to flag. But otherwise, it's important to know that we do have a very strong and robust curriculum there up to junior cycle that addresses these important areas.
No, thanks. That's very helpful, Net. And I guess the challenge is always things can be mandatory, but it doesn't necessarily mean they land or they connect or engage with people. So that is, I think, where some of the question might have been coming from as well. So, Celeste, do you want to add anything else further, please?
No, I think Annette has covered that really.
Okay.
Yeah, we're happy. Thanks, Paul.
So, unless any other panelists. Okay, next question going to go into the issue of magic mushrooms and what evidence brought to conclusion that it's a party drug where there is, as represented evidence of it being therapeutic or supporting issues of depression and other supports. Michael, was that on your presentation? Sure it was.
Most drugs have both therapeutic and other opportunities associated with them, and we know magic mushrooms or mushrooms or whatever we want to call them have been used and are used in therapeutic settings. The reasons our students take them for them largely is for fun. And that's what they've told us. No doubt that some would take it on occasion to relieve distress, but the data tells us that the reason they take it is for fun.
Can I just, sorry to catch you on the hop here, maybe Professor Johanna Hivers, if you're at the back there. I know you're doing some research in relation to the issue of magic mushrooms and third level. Is there anything else you'd want to add just to what Michael said? If I didn't catch you on the hop. I know I did, sorry about that. I saw you on your phone, so I had to intervene there, sorry. Am I joking?
Thank you, you've eyes everywhere. I think I'd just bring it back to what I always bring it back to. So I am doing a study being led by my colleague John Kelly, looking at psilocybin for cocaine users. What I would bring it back to is that it's very much an emerging science. And I think that we're approaching it in that measured way that we should, because we've learned from giving substances to treat other substances that it doesn't always go well. So yeah, I'd say that we need to be measured about it, and I would say watch that space. It is an emerging science. We know that from other jurisdictions, but yeah, let's not jump full feet into it either.
Thank you, Johanna. Sorry to catch you there. But probably warn for the rest of our observers to make sure we're tuned in case I call you in too. Sorry, Michael, table 14 had a very clear question again, was the whole issue of potential of random drug testing be an issue around prevention. And again, some of the other panellists might have a view on this.
Yeah, so I think the question was, would random drug testing be a deterrent for students? I think the short answer is no, although I'll qualify that, but obviously drug testing may be a deterrent for some students, but you know, they may well be the wrong students. They may be the students who do not want to offend, the students who do not want to be detected, and the students who perhaps don't take drugs in the first place and unlikely to take drugs in the first place. And I suppose the other thing just to challenge ourselves is, why would we introduce random drug testing for students when it doesn't exist for society in general?
Thank you. Any other panellists want to make a comment? Don't feel the need to.
I just echo that you know, these kind of punitive interventions, they can actually increase risk sometimes. So we know things around sniffer dogs at festivals and that kind of thing. And you kind of have to question, what does it serve, random drug testing? These kind of zero tolerance approaches, they deny people opportunities for support. So they're actually quite unhelpful. We're just trying to catch people on the hop, and there's no real purpose to it. So, yeah.
I think there are many unintended consequences, such as, you know, have been described there, that the students would not engage in preventative strategies, and it would become a cause célèbre amongst the student body that our only response was, drug detection.
Okay, thanks to you both. Table 5, 9 and 13, if I can take in that order, please.
Hiya. There's an emphasis on spending more money, but what we want to know is what's the effectiveness in schools. Should we have more experts, real life experience, more school counsellors, more student mental health issues?
So can just to help the panellists, the effectiveness in schools, and should we have more specialists or experts, is it, in the
yeah, real life experience.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. Come back to that in a second. Table 9.
A question for Dr. Michael Byrne. were students asked why they don't use drugs, those who don't use them? And was trauma given as an option for reasons to take drugs?
Okay. Thank you. Again, very clear. We'll come to Michael in a moment. Table 13.
Sorry. Good morning, everybody. Our question is quite simple. It's what is meant by the exchange registry, and can you develop a little more about it? Because we only touched on it at that time. We'd like a little more. Seems to be a relevant part of the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that will be for Karen, that one, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So firstly, table 5, the effectiveness in schools, and should we be using more people with real-life experiences in the delivery of the programme? Celeste?
Yeah, so I suppose I might talk, there's a couple of things there, and one is whether we do bring in people with lived experience. I think that it's really important that the SPHE curriculum is addressed in the way that's intended. So it's all about equipping children and young people with the skills that they need, to the social and emotional skills, to deal with the situations they find themselves in and to deal with the world around them. What we are trying to do with that is the positive approach, and to stay away from, I suppose, too much of a focus on like what might be perceived as a sort of a warning to students, or, you know, this could happen to you kind of approach. Now, that's not in any way to dismiss the type of intervention that they could have, but I think it's really just to keep it in that positive space. And we have to be very mindful as well that, like, schools will all have, there will be different school contexts, and every class will have children in it with different backgrounds and different experiences in their own lives. So there has to be a sensitivity as well in that, and an ability for schools to kind of respond, for the teacher to respond to the class that's in front of them actually, and to you know, to ensure that what's there is appropriate for that class, for those children and young people at their age and at their stage. I think there was a piece in that question about maybe supports more generally for schools, am I right? And I think it might be just worth mentioning the wellbeing framework, and I mentioned that earlier briefly in the presentation, but it is a whole school preventative approach to ensuring kind of health and wellbeing in the school community. So within that, for example, there's a wellbeing office based in the National Educational Psychological Service. So that's kind of coordinating all wellbeing matters, and there are different structures there and different supports for schools through the National Educational Psychological Service. So where there's kind of difficulties or mental health issues, there's a particular support there for schools. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely affirm everything you said there, Celeste. And just, I suppose, in a nutshell to say, the evidence shows that the most effective model and approach in school-based education in this area is for teachers within the classroom to be the facilitators of conversations with young people, because they are provided, of course, that they are well trained and equipped and confident and competent in this area. So more training and support for SPHE teachers is really, really crucial and is urgently needed, I'd have to say, because the alternative is that we have people coming into schools, some of which are very excellent, but obviously not all, and therefore there's sometimes unintended consequences. You can have people going in and sharing their own stories, for example, and you mentioned that earlier, Richie, that often can lead to young people having, either being triggered by that in a negative manner, or maybe thinking, oh, this person actually came through this and it's okay for me to take drugs and I'll come through at the other end and maybe I'll be out telling my story. So there's all of these unintended consequences. So it's all about the teacher in the classroom, and also when the person walks out the door, there's no follow-up then probably. So we need sustained education in this area. So it's not just a once-off intervention, a 1 hour person comes in this Friday and by next Friday it's forgotten. So there is obviously a role for the drugs, for experts to come in, but it has to be very carefully, judiciously chosen people who can complement what's happening in the classroom and not as a substitute.
Can I just ask off-piste to Karen and Richie, just from a health perspective, do you see any value in lived experiences going into some of the programs that you use? I presume it does a lot.
It's tricky. Like, lived experience has value, but it's essentially it's a person's story. Can other people relate to that? Sometimes, maybe yes, but it depends on how it's delivered. It can sometimes glamorise drug use. It can arouse an interest in drug use. and again, like for the reasons that were mentioned, it's not particularly helpful. It doesn't. There's no follow-up after it. You know, if a child goes home and ruminates, they're left to the internet. And when you go on the internet to look about drugs, you can find anything, generally positive about drugs. So it's we tend to discourage it. There's much better things we can do in schools, and that's really where we should focus our attention.
I think this is an interesting, topic and dilemma, because a lot of what we've heard through lived experience here certainly informed us through this process, and it may not necessarily relate in terms of education sector, but I'm not sure of Eamon Keenan, who's worked with us on a few things. I know he's an interest in this area too. Dr. Eamon Keenan, yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Paul. I suppose.
Maybe you can stand up if you like, just so everybody can see you. You're small.
I was.
You're
standing.
small like
Yeah.
myself.
I suppose in relation to this, my concern about the use of people with lived experience coming into schools is that sometimes that can be used as a tick box, that the school may abdicate responsibility for introducing the evidence-based prevention work that you've heard today by saying we're getting in somebody with lived experience. This is like the shock tactics. This is going to put the kids off, and we've done something in relation to drugs for our population, when they really need to be getting the teachers trained, the teachers incorporating the information into the curriculum and doing prevention work in that way, as opposed to the lived experience person who has their own merits, but it's not for the school environment, in my opinion.
It's very interesting insights overall there. Table 9 had a question around, was it tested why people don't use drugs, and also was it tested the issue of trauma being a reason why people may have used drugs, if I've represented the question correctly. Michael?
Yes, so that was an important finding, and 3/4 of students said they don't use drugs because they've no interest in drugs. The next most common category of reason for not using drugs was concern around physical and mental health and well-being. And it then fell in terms of concern around financial and legal consequences. So actually it's a lack of interest in being intoxicated through drugs was the main reason. 3/4 of students who don't use drugs chose not to use drugs. And there was a second question then as to were the students asked around the option of trauma, so as to the reasons for using drugs. And I think it is really important, and again I'd commend you to have a look at the report, but the students were given 5 options to pick as to their main reason. And they could pick more than one, by the way, okay? So the options they could pick was to enjoyment or fun, to fit in, the concept of peer pressure, to relax, actually use it as a relaxant, other, you could put any other, and the one, I suppose this would be under, is emotional distress. And emotional distress, I suppose, would cover trauma. And just to say, and if you look at the graphs, emotional distress doesn't rank more than, single-digit percentage for any drug or any category of drug users. So whilst there's no doubt the lived experience of those who do take drugs and end up sometimes in addiction would be a background of trauma, for the data suggests that the majority of our students take drugs for reasons other than trauma and emotional distress. And that's something that I think this Citizens Assembly needs to know.
Again, very helpful insight. Can I just go to Karen on the issue of the exchange registry and people having an interest? Was that for yourself?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Love a straightforward question. The exchange registry is a registry that was put together by the European Monitoring Centre for Drugs and Drug Addiction. Gregor, who you heard from earlier, who's the prevention lead in that agency, was really key and instrumental in putting that registry together. But what it does is it brings together prevention programs that have been evaluated in a European setting, and it's a big list of them. You can search it through by family-based prevention, school-based prevention, and what it does, it's a list, and it shows you what the evidence of the European evaluation shows. So it goes from likely to be harmful to beneficial, or likely to be beneficial, or more research needed. So it's a really useful tool actually, and it's something when we were running our funding programme that we encouraged everyone to look at and try and bring these programmes into an Irish context. The other thing about that is actually the Department of Children are doing their own one now at the moment. It's called the What Works Hub. And it's a registry of prevention programmes that work and that are in Ireland. They don't have anything about drugs on it just yet, but we are going to work with them to get evidence-based drug prevention things up on that hub as well. So look, we're moving in that good direction in Ireland too, which is really positive. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And Carl just reminds me there is a link on the members area of their site, Student Assembly site, to the Exchange Registry if people want to get some more information on that. It does sound something of particular interest to the Assembly. Okay, can I go to tables 1, 6 and 11? We're tight on time. I'll take the 3 questions as quick as we can. Table 1, 6 and 11.
So we had a few questions, but we'll just limit it to one. We talk about the main, Dr. Michael Byrne talks about the main reason that third level students use drugs is to have fun. And I think everyone in this room likes a bit of fun. And we also heard in previous meetings that the overwhelming majority of people that use drugs come through a filter or a funnel system, and they come out the other end, and they don't get trapped in this scenario, this problem scenario we talk about. So our question is about how you align this fun then with this criminal underworld that's going on without getting into shocking messaging, and how you would tackle that in education, in health and in policy in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Table 1, very clear again. Table 6.
We've heard a lot about the schools, and that's been very interesting. This is for Karen. But when is the right time for a parent to bring up the subject of drugs with their children?
Very good question. And table 11.
Hello. What matrix are being used to judge the effectiveness of prevention programs? And another very small question. This one is for Celeste. There's a school of thought out there that bringing experts, and I'm not saying people that live the experience, but experts into schools as a team to discuss substance misuse is more effective than actually training our own teachers. Maybe a combination of both could be provided. Thank you.
Okay, that's an interesting one that's coming up across tables. I'm going to ask the panellists just be brief in response, and I'll try to get through as many as we can. So the first one was the issue of how do we align this issue of, which the evidence demonstrated, most people taking drugs for fun, with the understanding of the whole criminal aspect of it in the underworld without taking a shock approach to it. Again, I'm going to go in first instance on the education side to put you into that. Annette or Celeste, do you want to just come at that?
I might let Annette talk about that, because that's where kind of the age and stage appropriate piece comes in.
Just briefly.
The first question here was in relation to the complexity. And this comes back to needing trained and qualified teachers in the classroom, because none of these issues are straightforward or black and white. And we don't need teachers going in and pretending that they are either. So it's about seeing the grey in life in general. And when we're teaching SPHE, there's a lot of grey areas. So really skillful facilitation and not going in and just preaching and being judgmental. That doesn't work with young people. I've done consultations over the last 4 years up and down the country in relation to what young people need in this area of education. And they keep saying, we don't want judgy teachers who are telling us what to think. And teachers who recognise our world and the complexity of it. So I think that's the straightforward answer. It's all down to teacher professional development. And then on the other education piece was around the outside facilitators. It isn't, again, it's not a black and white either or. Yes, there is scope for outside facilitators across in this area. You can imagine how helpful it is for a teacher, for example, when they're doing aspects of relationships and sexuality education, to bring in perhaps an expert in that area, or somebody from a rape crisis centre, whatever, to talk about domestic violence, and equally in relation to drugs education. And there's a fantastic team of people around the country in the drugs and advisory I've got the term wrong, task force. And they are skillful and equipped to go into schools as well and support teachers. But once it's in a supportive manner, and it's not to substitute or say, well, that's that box ticked, as was mentioned down the end of the hall earlier. So it's to complement and support rather than to substitute, and that's how it can work really, really effectively then, I think, to bring in your outside experts as well.
Okay, and tomorrow we do have a case study from Clondalkin about using other people, other skills, and how, with lived experiences, how it might help. Secondly, Karen, can I go straight to yourself? I love this question. When's the right time?
I'm going to defer to Richie on that one.
When's the right time for the parent to engage on this issue?
So I suppose if we're looking at kind of family-based prevention, it's a life course thing. There's no right time. Okay, so I think it's about keeping communication lines open with your children. So it's really about when's the right time that they come to you, so that if a child feels comfortable talking to their parents about drugs or other risky behaviours, that there is a line of communication. There's no set time. Again, it's going back to the idea of an inoculation at a certain point in a child's life. That works with vaccinations and stuff. With this kind of thing, it can be different for different children, so there's no set time. What you're better off having is an open relationship where you can talk about these behaviours with your child, and they'll tend to come to you first if you have that.
Now, we were all hoping for a specific answer. What age is it?
There actually are very helpful guidance documents for parents that have been developed by the HSE, how to talk to your child about drugs and alcohol. And the Barnardo's website has really helpful guidance and documentation in this area as well. So for any parents out there who are interested, those would be two go-to places, I'd suggest.
Okay, no, thanks. And then finally, table 11, the second part of the question has been answered, but and randomly across the panel, just any views on the metrics or how we measure the effectiveness of prevention programmes? So, Karen, maybe any views?
Richie again will be an expert on that one. Sorry.
No, I suppose it's like evaluating anything. We've different sort of rigours of evaluation. So kind of the gold standard are randomised control trials. So we can, like I think I shared a study in Peru where they did a randomised control trial among schools who just did the Unplugged programme, and then schools who did Unplugged with the universal prevention curriculum. And they could see a difference in outcome when they look at prevalence rates. So it is possible to evaluate it. But I think prevention is tricky because evaluations tend to need to be longitudinal. So it can take a number of years, because if you intervene with, let's say, 12-year-olds, you mightn't see any real patterns of change for 10 years. And that's expensive. Good prevention is invisible as well. It's things that we don't notice around us, the environments, the cues. It can be tricky to measure, and that's kind of the challenge for prevention. But it is possible, and again, if you go back to the Exchange Registry, it will link you to all the studies that were used, and it will only rank evaluations of particular quality. So if it's a poor quality evaluation, it doesn't go up on Exchange. So if you'd find out a little bit more on that website.
And any of the other panellists want to make a brief comment? Celeste?
Just briefly add, I just think that's a really good question, because evaluation is so important to give us an evidence base for what we're doing and to make sure that what we're doing has impact, or that we can in some way demonstrate that. I mentioned in my presentation the evaluation of the Know the Score materials, and some of that, and as Richie says, different ways of evaluating depending on what you're evaluating, but in that I think that will include engagement with young people in focus groups on how they perceive that, the impact that resource has had for them as well. So there's lots of different ways of evaluating, but I think it will be to try and demonstrate. I suppose you have to start out knowing what you're trying to achieve and then try and measure against that. The other piece to mention is, and I talked earlier about school completion programs and the interventions that happen to try and keep students in school. So we can see that the school completion rate has increased, and I think the graph that I had there showed that school completion has increased quite significantly in recent years. So there's sometimes there's an external sort of outcome that you can see, well, what's happening is actually effective here.
Okay.
But it's, different responses for different interventions, I think.
Thank you. And I know we've eaten about 3 or 4 minutes into your deliberation time, but we will make it up at the tea break, I've no doubt. I think it was a really good, engaged Q&A and discussion on some of the issues that's been hovering around for the last few Assembly meetings. Can I ask you to show your appreciation for the panel? Thank you very much.